short history of the world. Yeah. And today is Friday, October 11th, 2024. And we are still we're going to finish up with Awakenings of Power. We're going to do a really good dive into Greece today and free thinking. And I'm not going to it's just going to take too much time. I think we're good. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's great. You know, the final thing, if you could do it, is get that camera view on that monitor so I can see what I can look, and I have a self view essentially, and that allows me to engage much more effectively. But wow, this is good. Let me take instead of 30 minutes, or I don't know how much of the class last week was tech. Yeah, 5 minutes. But I want to address this. And so let's just make sure everybody's connected. And Alec will let me know from the live chat if there are problems or anything. It's great that you are here so we can really jump into this. Yeah, go ahead. So I'm going to start. Welcome, everybody. 5 minutes late instead of 45 minutes like last week, and that's a real sign of progress. We are in Short History of the World. It's week 6, and you've already handed in your first assignment. Next week is your second assignment. Next Thursday it's due. Today we're going to really drill down with Awakenings of Power. Basically do the presentation that I meant to do last week if we didn't have so much tech difficulty. But we did a good review last week, and that's good. So let me just take a few moments to make sure we are fully on track and everybody is on this spacecraft, this spaceship that journeys through the human story. I want to thank you all first for being patient in what's happening in this room. And I'd like to start with a little bit of review in terms of the discussion posts, some of the discussion posts that dealt with the tech issues last week. I really appreciated what some of you said. And actually, Alec, I think, recognized this, and some of you did in your discussion posts as well, that what you saw me do last week, great, it's okay. Andrew, thanks, this is good enough. What you saw me do last week actually was a teachable moment about what this Awakenings of Power is all about. So for those of you who wrote at length, the asynchronous students, for example, that the tech issues that you were watching last week were annoying and difficult to get through, and for those of you who also gave some advice on how to do the tech better in this class, I need to explain something to all of you, and also explain as well that technology and science are the two greatest forces in the human story. And what you witnessed me doing last week is troubleshooting very complicated technology on my own. And that's something humans are doing more and more of today. And there's a story, a great story behind this, of how we got to the point where we've created this amazing technological civilization. You're going to see that start to happen today with Awakenings of Power. Awakenings of Power is about the awakening to greater and greater free thinking that leads humans to invent more. And I think most of you started to get that last week, but I tried to take advantage of the tech issues by trying to show you that you're witnessing a human in real time managing complicated technology, trying not to let it control him, but yet he knows he needs it. Well, that's our world that we live in today. We all live in that world. And this is a world of great technological power and complexity. So you're seeing in real time me doing that. So it's a great teachable moment. But the other thing I want, particularly the students who might be a little bit annoyed and impatient with this, please understand we are building a completely, I'm not saying a new kind of classroom, but it's a multimedia, high flex classroom that we're going to be taking to Japan next year at the World Expo. And we believe that what we're doing here in this classroom, based on what a lot of people have said, is the future of education. It's being able to use technology in a post-pandemic world to make education very flexible, but at the same time, ensuring that the content is always king. The ability to create this room means we're experimenting. And so for those of you who may be a little bit annoyed, please keep watching the classes and understand what we're doing here. And if there's a problem and you would prefer me to just stand and deliver PowerPoints or submit PowerPoints online and that's all you watch, and there's no in-person component, there's no YouTube, there's no high definition, there's no multimedia wall, then let me know in an email and I can help you privately, okay? But yeah, for those of you who are coming in person and understand, thank you for being patient. I'm hoping we can turn education into something that in the future is a lot more theatrical, is using new technologies, maybe as well as or better than the tech that you have in your hand all day. And education has largely been behind for many years in bringing technology into the classroom, in part because it's complicated and because there's no support for it. But I'm a professor who comes from a long career in television and film production. I understand what I'm doing, but I know it takes a little bit of time and things may go wrong. I need tech support, but I don't have it. So I just do it myself. But we're good today, okay? So we can move on. Alec? It's it, absolutely. And you're going to see that today when we actually go to the very grove and see a picture of the very grove where the great Greek philosophers under the Acropolis, people like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and many of the great Greek free thinkers would gather and debate and discuss and created the first academies, the first schools. And it was all about people coming together in one place outside beneath the great Acropolis in Athens, where they have the Parthenon. And you know the picture of the, you ever seen the beautiful Parthenon on the top of the Acropolis in Athens? Well, down below there was a great market. I'm going to get to that in a moment, okay? But Alec, you're right. What I'm trying to do, in a way, it's very old fashioned. I'm trying to bring education back to its most exciting thing, which is people come together in person and they debate and they discuss and they learn together. But then we're in the 21st century, Alec. So I'm layering in something that the Greeks never had, which is all this technology. And what the technology is supposed to do is enrich this experience so that everybody outside now of this can join if they like remotely. The pandemic showed us we can do that. And so that's what you're witnessing in this room is an attempt to do that. And I hope one day that we're going to make all of you and all of the college very, very proud of what we've done when we present to bigger international audiences. Great. Okay. So is there anything, if there's anything online in the live chat, I'll let Alec let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to get right into it and we can really look at Awakenings of Power much more deeply today. The first thing I want to do is play a video for you that I've been meaning to play for 2 classes, and that's on Alfred Russel Wallace. Now, just raise a hand if any of you have seen the video in the folder yet and clicked on it. Probably not, because it's been there, but I didn't actually talk about it. But some students will go and watch stuff that's there in the folder just on their own. Okay, great. Thanks. Good. So I'd rather you not have seen it. Usually when I ask, I hope you have seen things, but this time it's the opposite. Let me come back to the whole story, okay? And we are now in a much better position today. We can start really doing the content much earlier. Here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lecture today. We might have an activity, but I think the better thing to do, just because we're a little bit behind, is in my lecture, we'll discuss. If you have questions, I'll take questions, and I'm going to move things along. So essentially for the next hour, it's going to be a great, I hope, multimedia interactive lecture with all of you. Images, slides, videos, discussion, as I move the story along, picking it up from about 5,000 years ago, which is where we left off last week, when civilization is really going to start to develop much more intensively as a result of two important revolutions or breakthroughs: food production or agriculture, and the invention of writing. Now, I have not shown you as much as I wanted about those early years from 10,000 to 5,000 in terms of what we were doing with food production and agriculture. And I've barely touched on the invention of writing. I'm going to have to keep moving past those two important breakthroughs and take us a little further now into government and politics. And just please assume that you've more or less seen those lectures, but you haven't. But the two critical pieces of information are that there were two breakthroughs: the food production part, agriculture, and writing. And that what we humans were doing in the very earliest civilizations is we were evolving. Now, you have seen in the larger story of how everything outside of the planet that we would call nature developed according to science. And we did a very good review last week, and Joshua took some good notes there. And we have that in the notes in the folder of that period of time from 13.7 billion years ago, up into the beginning of the life and complex life and the larger creatures on the planet. More oxygen comes into the atmosphere. And then gradually we get the great divergence, and we see humans developing from lower primates, and we begin to see this incredible story happen at the end of the last ice age, about 10 to 12,000 years ago. When the ice melted, there was more water, rivers are starting to really develop, and communities began to develop around these rivers, largely in what we would call Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, today's Iraq, Fertile Crescent. But let me bring up a map, and then we can jump into Awakenings of Power. But let me put the map in here for now, so we don't need the self view, but we can still do this. And then we have this as a reference point through today's class. And I'll just leave it there for now like that. Okay, everybody can see. Evolution is what you have been watching unfold. The greatest natural force on planet Earth. We did not create evolution. We don't even know who did. But we have religions to help us imagine why it happened, that there was this thing called life that developed and then it evolved on this planet. The two people who were most important in telling us about this process scientifically were Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. I want to show you this video of this other guy, as he's known, Alfred Russel Wallace, not Charles Darwin, the person everybody understands and knows more or less as the scientist who first published Origin of Species in the 1850s and helped us to understand evolution, but Alfred Russel Wallace in this lovely video, not just to remind us about the evolutionary force that you're seeing, but actually about the powerful human mind. When we talk about awakenings of power that I'm going to show you today, largely with the story of Greece, setting up other empires that would follow, you're going to see how humans, almost instinctively, almost genetically, you can't say for certain, wanted more than a god king to rule them, wanted to take their destiny into their own hands. The world dreams of things to come, and then in due season arouses itself to their realization. This is Alfred North Whitehead, one of our great philosophers of the 20th century, who wrote a book called Adventures of Ideas. And he talked about this idea that the human mind, which is unique on planet Earth, is a curious, restless, dreaming mind. And Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace really embody this idea of the powerful human mind on a quest to understand the truth of the natural world. I want to show you this video so you understand this, because we are kind of all like that today. There are among us, in person and online, religious humans, whatever your religion is. But deep down, combined with that desire to reach to your religion for answers, it is something else. It's the human who wants to know, is curious, and wants proof, not stories. This is maybe the most important part of our story this semester. You will see many things coming, many wars, many inventions, many discoveries. But the one thing that is very important to remember, as H.G. Wells told us in one of his early world histories of the 20th century, an outline of history, is you are not awake to your own power. What does that mean? Well, let's watch Alfred Russel Wallace, who was very awake to his own power. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to take you back and really start the story today. So for those of you online, go ahead and click on the video in the DC Connect folder for class 4. Okay, you will see A.R. Wallace, and I'm going to go to it right now, and I'm going to play it for all the students here. Thanks, Alec. Yes, he did, Alec. He wrote War of the Words, War of the Worlds, War of the Worlds, not War of the Words, War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells. I have a little bit of tangential information about H.G. Wells that I need to say, but I won't belabor it. H.G. Wells was a ferocious racist. Yeah. He did tell us some important things about the human story. But unfortunately, he believed wrongly that there are superior human beings and inferior human beings. We know differently now. We've always known differently. We have what's called human rights. There are no superior human beings. There are no genetically superior human beings. That's called pseudoscience. H.G. Wells was a novelist. He was a science fiction writer. He was not a scholar, but he was a brilliant person nonetheless, Alex. And War of the Worlds is a classic science fiction story of the human future. But that was more than 100 years ago. We've moved on from H.G. Wells. But he has told us some things that are important. And he had a very good understanding of Greece and what Greece, the golden age of Greece, represented. He called it the lamp of humankind in terms of how it gave us freer thinking. And he gave us that wonderful line, "You are not awake to your own power." He said that what the Greeks showed us is that most of us are not awake to our own power. But once you become awake to your free thinking and you're ready to deal with it, you unleash a great deal of power for invention. But I just want to caution you, Alex, and I want to caution all of you that as important as he was as a thinker, he was unfortunately wrong about human nature. We would never have human rights, guys. We would never have a global classroom like this, where there's brown, there's black, there's Catholic, there's Jewish, there's Buddhist, there's woman, man, all together, if we didn't believe that we humans are basically all the same. But if we lived in another time, I, as a Jew, would be thrown into an oven and burned. A black woman would be thrown off a boat, singing Amazing Grace as she's on her way to become a slave in the United States. And she doesn't want to go there, so she kills herself across the Atlantic Ocean because she's considered inferior. And we might say, oh, because somebody has a mental disability or a physical disability, that somehow they are inferior. And that's what H.G. Wells would say. Thankfully, we're learning more and more from great scholars, and we can put important people in the past into their place when they were wrong. So, Alfred Russel Wallace is somebody you need to know about, not just because he and Charles Darwin in the 19th century showed us that we are not angels who were put here by God, or we are not sinners who were put here by God, that we are not the ones who have dominion over nature put here by God, but that we are part of a process, a scientific process of evolution. They were the humans that began to show us that. And this video will help you to understand that a little bit more. He was awake to his own power. So, Alex, Benjamin, Max, do you all have that class, DC Connect, folder number 4 open? I want you to make sure you run that video because I'm not going to. Excellent. Go ahead, guys, run it, and we're going to run it here. And this should work properly. Okay? Here, oh, good. Even this mouse is working well today. So let's go over here to Alfred Russel Wallace. And let me make sure we have our audio. And here we go. Hold on. Where's our audio? It should be here. Come on. There we go. Yep. There it is.
This is an idea that has been sought after since the dawn of human thought. And it was a theory that was discovered by two people, and we've blindly forgotten one of them. What on earth is happening to poor old Alfred Russel Wallace? Alfred
Mr. Wallace was born in 1823, living at a small cottage by the banks of the Rhubarb in Wales.
And what was his brother, and they're surveying the British countryside. It becomes interesting part. This is brilliant. There's nothing that much to become interested in. I say that with a certain amount of national pride. In 1844, he meets Henry Walker Bates.
Bates turned out to be a really keen Beatles character.
Here come the lights. Well, let's have a little discussion, just a brief one, to make sure that this is something that you've given a little thought to before we move on. And I'm going to tee up the whole presentation. What would you say is really important in what you just watched? If you were to write a discussion post, where you're asked, can you please explain what you thought was the thing that stood out the most? I always like challenging students to really think about what they consider essential. So, Alec, please go ahead. Is it working?
No, I was just waiting for it to turn
Yeah,
on.
go ahead.
What I found most interesting was the fact that even though it seemed that like Charles took a lot of the credit for the discovery, he was more interested in the actual work of the theory of evolution than actually taking credit for it.
Great observation. I was going to get there, but you've already jumped ahead. Notice the character? For those who might be a little bit cynical today and think that everybody's just out for themselves, or who think that information is just all make-believe today and everybody has their own truth. There is no truth. It's just what he thinks and what he thinks. And you just post that on Instagram, or you post it on Meta or Facebook or whatever, on X, and you just say what you got to say, and that's your truth. That's called narcissism. It's called me. Attention for me. Well, look at this guy. What did he really want? Attention for himself? Glory? Money? Maybe a little bit. Let's be honest. Everybody wants a bit. But what did he really want? Alec has said that, but let's make sure we understand something here, because I would like to show you a story on this planet that is as true as we know from science, that might make you feel pretty good about being human. Because right now, when you look around the world, or even in Oshawa or your own life, it looks pretty awful sometimes. Savage, cruel. Just this week, I'm walking by a house in my neighborhood. A woman went and stabbed somebody, and then she went and stabbed another person, and then the next day she killed 3 people just up the street from me. A woman. We could go on and on and on about how cruel and sickening the world can look today. And yet, actually, that's just a small part of the story. He didn't care. He wanted us to know what he saw. He went there bravely. First, his boat burned when he was coming back with all his samples. Did he let that stand in the way? Nope. He persevered. Do you persevere? When things go wrong, do you keep going? Yeah, you do. Because you're human. Alec?
Although I know, like I said, but more curious is originally his thoughts were of getting recognition. That's the whole reason he went on these trips to begin with. What made him change his mind?
I think this is just my thought. I have not read enough about his life to really know what was motivating him, Alec, but you can. You know, there's a lot that's been written about Alfred Russel Wallace. It kind of comes back to what I said earlier in this semester. The larger the island of knowledge, the longer the shoreline of wonder. The more you start to know about the world as it is, you start to become more, in a way, fascinated and optimistic, because you think, wow, look at this process. Look at what's going on. I'm so interested in knowing more. And so you want to share that knowledge with others. You're kind of excited. Have you ever noticed scientists, when they talk, often they're smiling, or they're kind of interested. They really want to share the knowledge. I can imagine what it must have been like for the early religious prophets who were following Jesus of Nazareth as they were listening to him speak. And then they wanted to spread the good news. When you start to see things that you think are true, and then when you begin to know they're true, and you feel they are things that all humans should know, we humans we can't keep it to ourselves. I think there's a bit of that, okay? But anybody else want to say anything? If not, I'm going to bring up and really start to tell you something about this entire story that I think is so interesting. And we're going to lose our live chat. And there we go. Okay. So remember what I said, that when we talk about a story of humanity, we're not just looking at humankind. Humanity means a bond, the common human bond. Humanity means kindness or compassion or good feeling for other humans. And so I'm trying, as I tell you this story of what's been happening on this planet, how civilizations have come and gone, I'm trying to give you a slightly alternative story, not just about the emperors and the kings and the warriors and the wars and how many people got killed and how the weapons developed and who was the toughest, but actually something that I think is more relevant to all of us, which is what's happening to humanity. Who is humanity? Who are and what's happening to our feelings for one another collectively as we evolve? Two, what is basically human in us? What does it mean to be human? And the reason why I ask these questions is because if I spent a lot of time telling you about the history of Egypt, which I did earlier, but didn't have a time to go into detail this semester, I would eventually focus on the god kings, the pharaohs, Ramses and Tutankhamun, Akhenaten. Or if I told you about, the great god kings of early Sumer before Egypt and in Mesopotamia, you would learn about the warriors, the kings and their courts and the wealthy people. And then we would move on and we would come to Western history, Greece and Rome, and I tell you about Julius Caesar and Augustus and all the Roman emperors, and I'm going to get there. But that's the old-fashioned, male-centric, Eurocentric history of the world. There's a bigger history, the planet-wide history. It's about the humans. It's not about the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Muslims, the Chinese, the Jews, the Christians, and all of that. They're part of something bigger called the human race. And the human race consists of humans, humanity. Well, we live in a time in the 21st century, you may have noticed, where the machines are so powerful now. And you saw this last week, me spending 45 minutes trying to get the tech working. The technology has become so embedded in our lives that it becomes a kind of colder world, maybe. An automatic world, an algorithmic world. And who do our heroes become? Maybe. Well, not the Buddha, not a great thinker or writer like Plato or Aristotle or some of the great Chinese and Indian prophets, but who does our model become now? Elon Musk. Jumping hysterically on the same stage as Donald Trump. How embarrassing can you get? And yet he's a brilliant, brilliant engineer. No question. But as a human being, I would question where his humanity is today. It's all about humanity in the end. It's about us and moving forwards together. So when we look at awakenings of power, it follows the beginnings of civilization. We saw early on in the human story that civilization was beginning in what we call the heartlands of the world, the rivers of the world. So look at the map again, the world map, just to reorient yourself of where civilization was beginning. It began mostly early on in what is now Iraq, the Fertile Crescent, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. It began around the Nile River a little bit later, that's Egypt. It began around the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, that's China. It began around the Indus River, that's Pakistan and India, the subcontinent. It began also around the Gulf of Mexico in the Americas. It began around water, where communities began to build and grow their own food and domesticate their own animals. And then gradually, we had to figure out how we're going to govern ourselves. Who's going to rule all of these people who are gathering tens of thousands now in places like Lagash or Ur around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers? We never saw this collection of humans before gathering around rivers. How are they going to live together? Government began to form. What kind of government did we start to create that would allow us to live together and not be violent? Well, like any lecture that I give, I'm only standing on the shoulders of giants, to steal a cliche from Isaac Newton. Today's giants are William McNeill and his son, John. William McNeill, as I've mentioned before, I think I showed you his great Rise of the West, History of the Human Community, all taped up. Well, he's one of our great pioneers in world history. And today I'm also going to be talking about his other book, Plagues and Peoples, because he's going to help us to understand that one of the reasons why Greece and the golden age of Athens fell was not because the Spartans came in and defeated the Athenians. It's because there was a plague in Athens that killed their leader, Pericles, and many others. Plagues and peoples, infectious disease, epidemics in the human story actually are more important than you think. We just went through one. Well, there have been many plagues in history, and the way we humans dealt with them actually has dictated how empires came and how they fell. Rome too. Rome had its plagues. William McNeill has helped us to see that, and I will talk about that today, but his son, remarkably, these are two individuals kind of cut from the same cloth as Alfred Russel Wallace. They're scholars. They care only about information and good information. William McNeill spent 40 years writing Rise of the West, History of the Human Community. And then he had so many notes left over from it, and he thought, I got to do Plagues and Peoples now. And it was a pioneering history of its time in the 1970s when it was published. Nobody had written like he had on the impact of plagues on human beings. And he saw what our future might look like too, when you have many humans gathered in smaller and smaller places, millions and millions of humans all transmitting pathogens to each other. You know that plagues start with civilization because we're all living together, close. We're all breathing on each other, coughing on each other, spitting. John McNeill, his son, has followed in his footsteps. And I think if anything can tell you about this idea of the powerful human mind trying to help us understand, when the son follows in the father's footsteps in a positive way, and also becomes a historian doing the same work, it tells you something about their relationship. Probably they had a pretty good relationship, but that's just my little throwaway. If you'd like another piece of throwaway information to look into, have you ever wondered why Donald Trump and Elon Musk are hugging each other on stage right now? Look at their fathers. Both abused by their fathers, not physically. Elon Musk, in the biography that's been written about him, tells of how his father berated him in South Africa for not fighting in school when he was bullied, berated him when he came home, and made him feel even worse than the bullies did at his school. That got under little Elon Musk's skin. You can be rest assured. And Donald Trump's father, whoa, what a piece of work. Read about him and his time as a landlord in New York and how cruel he was to people who were black living in his shanty towns or whatever he had built. But he also was brutal to his family. Donald Trump had a brother who died of alcoholism. He was a pilot. And the father and Donald Trump disowned the brother. Wouldn't even go visit him in the hospital when he was dying of alcoholism. That's cold. That's cruel. Sure enough, the sons become their fathers. Awakenings of Power is about how we humans want more. We are curious. We want to see things. We want to explore. And so when we go back in time to understand how this happened, then in a remarkably short period of time, we began to create this way of thinking that has led to us becoming planetary species. We're leaving the planet. How did we do that? Well, it starts with somebody named Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh was the god king, one of the god kings in ancient Sumer. And if I had the map, I would have the map up there. But just remember, ancient Sumer is that civilization that began between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Along those rivers, there were these god kings, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, and many others. But Gilgamesh was the god king of what we believe was ancient Ur or Uruk, the kind of New York of its day, 25,000 people living all together in these early settlements. And he was the god king of the ziggurat. Do you remember the ziggurat? The ziggurat, which is where we brought all of our grain from outside, and he was the ruler of that city-state. That's a statue of him. One of the first novels ever written in world literature is called The Epic of Gilgamesh, and it tells the story of this god king from around 5,000 years ago who has trouble realizing that he's just a mortal human being. He believes he's a god, and so many others did too. When I said about the world dreams of things to come and in due season arouses itself to their realization, well, there were people in ancient Sumer who thought differently, who did not like the obedience that the god king demanded, did not believe that there is a human being who is half divine and who has some sort of access to the gods and can speak for the gods. The first person that started to think differently, But there were others that may have, but this is the one we know most of, is this person. His name in history is Abraham. And Abraham is the patriarch of the three monotheistic religions in the world. Monotheism means the belief in one God. There are many other religions, many other ways of looking at how we should live. Islam, for example, which will emerge many centuries later, is an incredible religion in the way that it also provides so many very detailed laws on how you should conduct yourself from the government all the way down to your daily life. No religion is like Islam in the way that it provides a complete package on how you should live in all respects. But that will come later. So for those of you who are Hindu, for those of you who may be Zoroastrian or indigenous and have a belief in multiple gods, please just travel along with us for a moment. In no way is it a disrespect to those religions that believe in multiple gods, as you'll see, but I need to tell you about one God, because that's generally the God of our sort of modern Western world. But there are many others who believe in multiple gods. But let me explain to you about this idea of God. If you believe in one God, you may think, well, that's normal. It's just natural. There's a God. History tells us God is a human invention. The idea of God is a human invention. And has a direct relation to Gilgamesh and the Sumerian god kings. You see, Abraham, who is the patriarch, the original, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims all derive their faith from this one original figure, the original patriarch. Abraham decided that he could not live in ancient Ur or Uruk, one of those city-states with a god king like Gilgamesh. He thought, this is wrong. I do not believe that there is a human who is a god. I feel in me something else. I feel a presence of some higher power. And it's not human. It's the life force. It's what's made us who we are. It's that invisible force behind us that has given us everything. Yahweh was the name he was given originally, and eventually it becomes God. One God. Abraham left his Sumerian city-state and went on a journey across the Middle East towards the Mediterranean, seeking a place where he could begin to practice this faith, this new faith in which he would honor this God, this invisible, almighty life force. There's no Gilgamesh here. There's no God king. Abraham was awakening to a new power. His conscience. Think of it. You are told many things in the course of a day by your teachers, by your parents, by people who supposedly know more, by powerful people. And yet inside you, there's something that goes, well, I'm not so sure. I have a conscience, something that's telling me that's wrong, and I feel differently, and I believe in something else. Well, that's your free thinking, your conscience. It's deep in you. We don't know exactly why. Maybe it's genetic, but it's there. We might call it instinct. Abraham began to journey, and according to the scriptures, this is what happened. We don't know for certain, from a historical standpoint, if Abraham even existed as a human, but it doesn't matter. As Alfred North Whitehead told us in Adventures of Ideas, what matters to humans, what matters to the evolution of our story, are the ideas that are passed on, the things we believe, the stuff that's in our head, the things we act on that are in our heads. So it's the ideas that matter more than the people. The idea here, the humans we're awakening to, is there's a higher power, one higher power. And so great is this power, according to the scriptures, that it is said in the scriptures of the monotheistic faiths, only Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Will you read this? In Genesis, Abraham was given a test. The test was to demonstrate that he understood how powerful and important this God was. He must be prepared to kill one of his own sons. That's how powerful this idea apparently was developing into. This is what we were supposed to be aware of, that there's this power, and it is so great, we must honor it and be prepared to recognize that it's even more powerful than the love we might have for our own children. It's a great sacrifice of his son. Well, in this test, Abraham did not kill his son. An angel appeared, took his hand, and stopped him from killing his son. You know why I'm laughing? Do you know that there still exists today a very deep divide between the Muslim and the Jew? Of course you know. There's a war happening in the Middle East. Terrible war, savage, cruel, staggering in its destruction. In part, it stems from this. But let me tell you, because you will laugh, but we shouldn't. For a Jew, God was showing his mercy and was saying, you get it. You know I'm powerful. You don't need to kill your son. But so deep is the hatred among some Muslims towards Jews and vice versa today that the Muslim will say, those damn Jews, they're always making deals. The Jew made a deal with God, but we Muslim, the real believers, we're ready to kill our children. Absolutely. We are powerful believers. Very powerful. We don't believe in infanticide. A Muslim does not want to kill his child. Of course not. But the story is telling us this. The story is telling us that your faith is what matters in this higher power. And the Muslim believes that their faith is stronger than the faith of the Jew and the faith of the Christian. And the Jew believes that the Muslim is all wrong. And the Christian, I mean, it's madness. But it all comes back to this idea that there's this new thing, God. Now, when we look at this idea of one God, we have to understand something about how it begins to kind of develop. It's a very important idea, even in ancient Egypt, which became the great empire after ancient Sumer was developing. Egypt, just south of ancient Sumer along the Nile River, had its own civilization, its own city-states that were emerging around the Nile River. Just the way there was Lagash and Ur and Babylon and Uruk around the Tigris and Euphrates, we would have Thebes in Egypt, and we would have Memphis as well, and many other city-states, and there were god kings in Egypt too. We just had a different name for them. We call them pharaohs. The god king. Ancient Egypt is one of our longest lasting civilizations in all of human history. 4,000 years. It existed as a force, as a great empire. There was only one time, one God king in all that time who tried to do things a little bit differently. And his name was Akhenaten. That's him. Akhenaten said that actually the king is not so powerful here. It's the sun. We should worship the sun god. In fact, there is a god, one god, and it's the sun. And he tried to instill this idea of the worship of one god into ancient Egypt, and it only lasted for a few decades until he died, and then Egypt went right back to the same very conservative society. Conservative's not bad, because you can hold the status quo for a long time, but it may not be very free. It may not be very fair. Alfred North Whitehead tells us that the story that's happening in the awakenings of power is that humans are opening the door to a little bit more freedom, a little bit more free thinking. There are these flashes of free thought and brave people who come along and start to do things differently. We might call them the mutants. Akhenaten was one of those. And he ruled at one point with a woman, Nefertiti. Women have been rulers in human history, but in Egypt, 4,000 years ago, this was highly, highly unusual. The two of them together represent something that's happening in our story in terms of awakenings to power. We're starting to see that actually there's another way that humans can rule, another way that societies can organize themselves. There can be a worship of a god that is higher, and women can also have power too. But this did not last very, very long. But it's almost like we had opened some kind of Pandora's box that we couldn't close. We'd opened this new idea of free thought. Now we start to see a new person emerge in Egypt, similar to Abraham, another religious prophet, and his name is Moses. Moses lived among the Egyptian pharaohs. He was brought up in an Egyptian court, but he also recognized that this was unfair, the way the court was being run, and that the people that he felt most close to, the Israelites, were also looked down upon by many of the Egyptian elite. And he, like Abraham, decided to leave Egypt, to seek another way, a promised land, just the way Abraham did. I'm going to stop in a moment, so we'll just do a quick review. It may seem so strange for me to say this to you, that awakening to a new power is awakening to the power of God. See, God is not human. God is something else. But that's what these humans are trying to tell us. As a matter of fact, when Moses left Egypt, Moses, like Abraham, one of the early prophets and patriarchs of the monotheistic world faiths, he went on a long journey according to the scriptures in Exodus. It's the second book of the Torah, or the Old Testament, as others would say. And he journeyed for 40 years in the deserts in the Middle East, and then went up to a mountain, Mount Sinai. You know, it's not unusual in the story of religious prophets to disappear to a mountain. Muhammad did it. Genghis Khan did it for the Mongols. Now Moses is going to do it. Before you go to a mountain, you go to the top of the mountain, and you hear something. You receive word of something, and on top of Mount Sinai, Moses got the commandments. He was talking to God. He heard God. So did Muhammad. So did Jesus. So did Genghis Khan. All these great leaders and figures, they often have these moments of revelation where they're in a cave or they're on top of a mountain. And Moses, his revelation was, here's what we need. Here's what we humans need to live in peace and in respect. Not a God king. We need God, but this is what our God wants. Our single God wants of you. 10 things. The 10 commandments. It's a powerful thing that's happening in our story. We humans are creating our laws. We're creating our ethics. And we're not expecting Gilgamesh to tell us what to do. It's almost as if in that moment when you were growing up and you looked at your parents and you said, or you felt, I know more than they do. I can figure it out. In fact, my parent who's a drug addict, my parent who's the alcoholic, my father who's beating up my mother, I would never do that. Who's the parent here? I am. You were showing that you have a free mind and a free conscience, and that you are able to be your own prophet, your own king, your own priest. You don't need the adult to tell you what to do anymore. You know how to do it yourself. Is this making sense? How many of you have felt that in your life, where you kind of realize, I got this. I don't need daddy and mommy and big brother and big sister, whatever. I know. And you probably were doing that when you were much younger, right? Well, I'm going to stop and we'll have a little chat. Then I will tell you a bit more, tell you about Greece, because I hope to do that today, but I'm catching up. Arnold Toynbee, who's another important world historian of the 20th century, he said in his book, The World in the West, that human nature without God's grace is not enough. What does that mean? I can tell you that that means a lot of power, but I want to stop and just make sure you understand this point about what monotheism and a single God is awakening in us, that is making us feel more powerful, more able, more capable. Human nature without God's grace is not enough. Let's see. Anyone want to try and explain? And if I could get over to the notes, I would, but that's our one note today, and that'll just have to be enough. What does that mean? Before I go default over here, let's bring back the cosmos. Okay, hold on and see what's happening over here in the cosmos. Okay, here we are. Go to cosmos, and maybe I'll do this. I'll bring in this because this is such a great image of the planet, because that's what we're really talking about. Yeah, planet Earth. One of the latest images from NASA looking across the moon at planet Earth. That's the moon's surface. Alex, humans are naturally inclined to believing in a higher power. That's kind of what Abraham was trying to tell us. And Alex, that in this higher power, what does the belief in it do for us as human beings? Like, so we believe in this higher power. Then what? What does that do for our society, for us as individuals? Do you want to try it? Are you able to jump on your microphone, Alex? Just to keep it moving. Can you do it? Okay, it may not. Type it in the live chat and we'll go here. Is there somebody else who wants to try and answer it? It's Sai, right? Is it? Raven Sai. Yeah, Raven Sai. Yeah, good. Yeah, I get you to be on the notes, but we need to hear you. So go ahead. Raven, so what does that mean? It's okay, Alex, don't worry about it. Just put it in the live chat. So Raven, what does it mean that we have this natural inclination to believe in a higher power? So we believe in it. What does it do for us?
Gives us purpose, gives our life meaning.
And when we have purpose and we have meaning, don't we do more? Don't we want to do more? Don't we give more, achieve more? We don't just want to sit on our butts, do we? We want to do, right?
And importantly, we want to do good according to the rules of that God.
As long as that religion or that faith provided us with the proper rules. And usually all religions provide us with the rules and a set of norms, things we need to follow in order to be good. That's something that the Greeks are also going to speak to, but in a more philosophical way, that humans do desire goodness. The question is how you achieve that. But we want to be. We don't want to get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say we're a bag of crap and we want to kill people and we're violent, and even criminals go into a jail and most of them think they're innocent. Even if they know they committed the crime, they will say, I'm innocent, because they want to feel human, that they're good. They had a reason for doing something bad. Yes, there's mental illness. Yes, people do terrible things because they can't control themselves. But for many who know what they were doing when they killed somebody, quite often they will say, I had a reason, and they want to be able to look at themselves and still feel good in a certain way. None of us wants to look in the mirror and say, there's a monster. Do we? Do you? Maybe on a Sunday night after a long Saturday of partying and dancing and whatever, you might look like a bag of monstrous stuff, but that's something different. We don't want to be monsters. Alec? Jonathan, yeah, I believe it keeps people sane. Very good. As a matter of fact, one of the things that you're going to see as we move forwards more in the story about awakenings of power is that what this awakening to free thinking really means is freedom. Being free to live as you like, do as you choose, pursue the course that you want, can be very thrilling and liberating. But it's daunting. It's daunting when you have nobody telling you what to do, what's good and what's bad, when you have to decide for yourself. That's called being an adult. It's called being a grown-up. And to give H.G. Wells his due, he said that one of the things that ancient Greece represented was not just that it was the lamp of humankind, and I'm speaking largely of ancient Athens, which is the golden age, but he said that it's there that we humans began to grow up. That in societies where you have these strong male figures ruling with absolute power, those societies are immature. I believe it was the great German philosopher Hegel who said that humans for many, many centuries lived under a self-inflicted immaturity because they couldn't handle their own freedom. They didn't know, they weren't educated. And among those who were educated, they were just weak and cowards and obedient, and they could not think for themselves. And so they wait for the strong man to tell them what to do. Yes, but I will say something else, Alec. For those of you who are going into a career of law and law enforcement, and there are students here among those, you have a challenge. I'm speaking to Police Foundation students, I'm speaking to students in other fields who may be working in an area where there's a lot of law. Please, as you go forwards with this, remember, you always have your own conscience. You always have your own mind. If you obey blindly the laws around you, you will find yourself in a very precarious situation where you may be taken advantage of and where you may do cruel things. Be very careful who you obey. And I would even say, be very careful of obedience. This is what a child does. A child obeys, but not a grown-up, not a free-thinking, critically minded, open-minded, strong human being. You think for yourself. And when you see something that's wrong, you practice what we think the 11th commandment should be. It hasn't been created, but some have said we should have an 11th commandment. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. All the 10 commandments that Moses gave. Here's the 11th one. Thou shalt not be an innocent bystander. I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to wait until I really take you through Greece. I'm behind. It's okay. As long as the story is getting told and you are listening and we can talk, it's all right. There's a lot today that you didn't see, but the critical idea is you're beginning to really, I hope, understand in an introductory way what this idea of power means. I'm not talking about coercive power, the power of an emperor or a king or a queen or a general to command of somebody else to do what I want. Alfred North Whitehead told us something else. He said that not only do humans dream of greater things to come and then in due season arouse them to that realization, he said that if you look at the story of human society, you will see that it's largely a slow sunrise, a very slow sunrise from the power of force to the power of persuasion, that we humans begin to learn over time, but slowly, that we don't need to be forced to do anything. We need to be persuaded. It's a very different thing. And it is the Greeks in the golden age of Athens who are going to help us to start to see that, largely through one of their great leaders, Pericles, and how they had to battle the Spartans in the Peloponnesian War and how they defeated the Persians in the Persian Wars. But those are wars, and they're amazing. And I'm going to tell you all about the hoplites and the phalanxes and the triremes and how ancient Greece had these incredible battle tactics. Who cares? That's war. War is not sustainable. Peace is. Peace is more relevant to your life and you going forwards than learning about war. War is interesting. It's terrible. It's cruel. Every single human being tells us, always. War's terrible for humans. Everybody dies. Some people live, the victors survive. But we must end war, they always say at the end. We must stop this. And yet we humans go on fighting wars, killing in greater numbers. Do we really want war? Is it really relevant to our lives? Yeah, it's relevant to history because that's how most of history is told, from one war to another. But is that really relevant to your future? War? No, peace is, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to know more about peace and how we keep peace and who sustained peace and who were the people that brought us peaceful ideas and who wanted to sustain life than those who were committed to conflict and war and destruction? Alec. Oh, microphone. We want to hear you, okay? Good. Go ahead. No, that's okay. The system doesn't always work. You want to talk and you don't want to grab a microphone. But
A lot of the wars fought in ancient Greece weren't actually sustainable to the point where they needed to collect money and funds from lower class societies. Or what was very popular at the time was soliciting widows of soldiers that had died in previous wars.
Well, it's part of, Alec, the greater idea, which is that our rulers, before we become more democratic and free, would expect the ignorant and the illiterate and others to work for them. It's similar to remember the picture I showed you of ancient Ur and the grain being brought in? It's the men and women working the land who can't write and don't have that knowledge, and they believe that they have to do all this work for their leaders who make good decisions for them. And that we're supposed to pay taxes and we're supposed to bring tribute and we're supposed to do all of these things for our leaders, our God kings, until we start to realize these people are not divine.
Yeah, a lot of
They're
the
human too, and they're fallible and they make mistakes. And why am I doing all of this for this divine-like figure when I know I'm smarter than he is?
yeah, but a lot of the stuff that they were told or they were taught, like you said, because they were uneducated, was usually based on ideas that weren't actually true.
Well, when you say an idea is true, that's a very interesting.
Well,
What do you mean true as an idea
example,
being true?
the war between Athens and the Spartans.
Yes.
The Athenians would tell the lower class Athenians that the Spartans were savages, and that they would go around killing children and women and do all this barbaric stuff.
It's partly true, Alec, but there were also Athenians who went over to the Spartan side and fought with the Spartans. they were I'll tell you about I'll check his name next time. He was the young leader in Athens at the time, who was a contemporary of Socrates, who was so upset that he was not provided with the respect in Athens. So he went and he actually fought with the Persians, and he turned himself into a freelance, warrior. He would fight. Well, basically, he's Donald Trump. You just sell yourself to anybody who will give you attention and money. Who cares? No morals. It's just me. That's all that matters. But in general, yes, but in war, all sides demonize the others. So, the Spartans would say the Athenians were elitists and they were very corrupt and they did not have any discipline and they were all interested in partying and sex and drinking and the Athenians would say to the Spartans, geez, these guys are so disciplined and it's so too militant and cold. They're always fighting. Can't they do anything but, fight wars? Why don't I stop? It's been a lot of information that I've given, but I want to make sure that the critical ideas have been understood today, and then we're going to conclude, okay? Let's come back to what we're doing here. We're telling a new story of history that can be told. It's the planet-wide story of the human race on planet Earth. And we're telling that story increasingly because we humans have this perspective now. We're in space. We look back at the planet and we think about, what's been going on down there all these millennia? Who had the power? Who didn't? How did the humans arise there? And what a remarkable planet that is. All of these things have been going on there for so many millennia. And look at how bright it is and how alive it is. And all these humans across the planet now. So, what would you say today that you've begun to understand about the way human civilization begins to evolve as we're beginning to move closer and closer, but slowly towards our present time? What have you understood today about the beginnings of human society, would you say? Or that you've begun to think about or question? I have 2 minutes. Let's see. In the live chat, please go ahead. If not, maybe we're starting to hit the afternoon doldrums, which means let's clear this out and, it's Friday. Have a good weekend, but let's make sure that you walk out of here with 1 or 2 big ideas, okay? So let's call this our mini take-up, okay? Just real fast, couple of minutes. Mini take-up today. So, what matters here? And we'll just do 2 things. So what should I write? Actually, Raven, would you be able to go over there and write this? Because you write better than I do. So what matters here? We've just explored together some early ancient human history, the beginning of human societies, essentially covering a period from around 5,000 years ago. I would say we'll take it up to about 2,000, so 3,000 years. We've covered a 3,000-year period. Ancient Athens, in its golden age, was 2,500 years ago. There was a 100-year period in the 400s BC. But we'll say we covered about 3,000 years. We're going to get to Greece. We're going to get to Rome, probably do the whole class on Greco-Roman world next week, because that's so important. But what would you say matters? Okay, Alec? What should Raven write? Sure, go ahead.
That even though we don't need God kings, we still need a figure to help more or less make people understand that not everyone is all powerful or all knowing.
Keep going. Write it, but don't write anything yet, Raven. We want to get it down to like just a few words. Yeah, this is hard. This is like get it down to rewind, come back. What's the critical, essential thing here?
A higher power was used to help bring human comprehension.
Let's see what Raven will put. Yeah, higher power becomes the power of a higher power. Good. The power of a higher power. Yeah, nice. We awaken to it. Okay, second thing. The power of a higher power. That's the first one. Second thing. And then we'll call it a class. Justin, you want to try?
Okay, is this on? Okay.
Yep.
So I think probably one of the second biggest point here is probably the idea of free thinking.
Keep going. So then what would be the few words? Free thinking is essential.
Yeah.
The power of free thinking. Why don't we just say the power of free thinking? Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good, Justin. And Raven, way to go, everybody. I would say that that's something to really ponder for your discussion post or your question. And for those of you asynchronously and synchronously, if you end up writing the reason for your question, maybe the question will be around this idea of free thinking and freedom. And Alec? Thank you. Attendance, here we go. Okay, so online, let me deal with the folks there. And I will save this, but in case I don't. So Alexis Solomon, Jonathan Davis, Jalil, Alec Corey, Jean, Amber, Alex, Max, Bell, H.G. Wells was here, but we want him to leave, go away. I think it was Hubert, George Wells. Benjamin Fordham, Max Carlos, Amber, Jonathan, Carlos, blah, blah, blah. Corey, if I missed anybody here, I don't think so. Great. And then now, oh God, here we go. Quickly, Alec McKenzie, Josiah, Young, yes, what's your name? Jonas. Nice, Jonas. Thank you. Okay, you were last week. I told you you asked not the best question. Now you're here in person. Way to go. Nice to see you. Yeah, great. Thank you. Sujith. Logan McFarlane. Right. Okay. Kaven. K-A. Right. Okay. Yeah. Of course. Justin. Yeah. That's Yash. Okay. Hello. Hi. What's your name? Oh, yes. Okay. So it would be. I know who. It's in my notes, but I just forgot. Of course, it's Omer. It's not. That's not Luke. It's not Kyle. Is it Kyle? It is Kyle Holt or Kyle Way. Kyle Holt. Okay. Brandon. Yes. Sham. Ethan. Oh, that's Tala, right? Okay, and then Raven, and now we're getting Raven. I love this. He figured out the colors. That is a free-thinking. See his mind. See, he could have just stood there and walk away, and he didn't. But now he's going with the colors, and this is what we humans do. It's remarkable, you know. He gets creative. That's you. That's us, but not in ancient Egypt or in ancient Sumer or Greece or Rome. Only a very few could be like that. You weren't allowed. Okay, everybody, that's it for today's class. You can always email me. I look forward to marking your first assignments. And if there's anything you'd like to speak with me about at the podium, please come. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out here. Thank you all online. And I will leave that for now. I'm going to take care. I'm going to cut my microphone so you can't hear. Anyways, the battery is going here.